As the credit crisis continues to grow and the U.S. dollar hits a new low, we turn today to the former chair of the Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan. Alan Greenspan headed the central bank in the United States for almost 2 decades. He was first appointed to this position in 1987 by President Ronald Reagan. Greenspan retired in January 2006 after deciding the fate of national interest rates under 4 different presidents. Dubbed the Maestro, he was widely regarded as one of the world's most influential economic policymakers. He's just written a new 500-page memoir. It's called The Age of Turbulence, Adventures in a New World. Alan Greenspan joins us now on the phone. And in our studio, we're joined again by journalist Naomi Klein, author of The Shock Doctrine. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Welcome, Alan Greenspan.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted.
It's good to have you with us. You worked with 6 presidents, with President Reagan, with both President Bushes. You worked with President Ford, and you worked with Bill Clinton, who you have called a Republican president. Why?
That was supposed to be a quasi-joke.
Talk about it.
Well, you mean Clinton?
Yes.
Well, I've stated that I'm a libertarian Republican, which means I believe in a series of issues such as smaller government, constraint on budget deficits, free markets, globalization, and a whole series of other things, including welfare reform. As you may remember, Bill Clinton was pretty much was doing much that same agenda. And so I got to consider him as someone, as he described it, as we were both an odd couple, because he is a centrist Democrat, and that's not all that far from libertarian republicanism.
About how much would you say you agreed with him?
On economic issues, I would say probably 80%.
And what about President Bush?
President Bush had the wonderful characteristic of knowing that it was not to his advantage or ours to interfere with the actions of the Federal Reserve. And I must say, through all of his years, he never once second-guessed what the Fed was doing. And that was very important to us, and we've been very much appreciative of that. But as I say in the book, he did not clamp down, as I thought was necessary, on what was a wayward Republican-controlled Congress, which I thought lost its way and started to spend and create all sorts of fiscal imbalances. And essentially what I hold, where I thought the administration could have done far better, is if the veto were employed. And as you may remember, he did not use the veto at all. And that what I thought would have created a much more balanced procedure in the Congress. So it's a mixed case in this regard.
Alan Greenspan, let's talk about the war in Iraq. You said what for many in your circles is the unspeakable, that the war in Iraq was for oil. Can you explain?
Yes. The point I was making was that if there were no oil under the sands of Iraq, Saddam Hussein would have never been able to accumulate the resources which enabled him to threaten his neighbors, Iran, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia. And having watched him for 30 years, I was very fearful that if he ever achieved, and I thought he might very well be able to buy one, an atomic device, he would have essentially endeavored and perhaps succeeded in controlling the flow of oil through the Straits of Hormuz, which is the channel through which about 18 or 19 million barrels a day of the world 85 million barrel crude oil production flows. Had he decided to shut down, say, 7 million barrels a day, which he could have done if he controlled, he could have essentially also shut down a significant part of economic activity throughout the world. The size of the threat that he posed, as I saw it emerging, I thought was scary. And so getting him out of office, or getting him out of the control position he was in, I thought was essential, and whether that be done by one means or another was not as important. But it's clear to me that were there not the oil resources in Iraq, the whole picture of how that part of the Middle East developed would have been different.
We're also joined in studio by Naomi Klein, author of the book The Shock Doctrine, The Rise of Disaster Capitalism. Your response to that, Naomi Klein?
Well, I'm just wondering if it troubles Mr. Greenspan at all that wars over resources in other countries are actually illegal. Mr. Greenspan has praised the rule of law, the importance of the rule of law in his book, but in his statements about the reasons why this has not been publicly discussed, he has said that it's not politically expedient at this moment. But it's not just that it's not politically expedient, Mr. Greenspan. Are you aware that according to the Hague regulations and the Geneva Conventions, it is illegal for one country to invade another over its natural resources?
No, what I was saying is that the issue which, as you know, most people who were pressing for the war were concerned with were weapons of mass destruction. I personally believe that Saddam was behaving in a way that he probably very well had, he almost certainly had weapons of mass destruction. I was surprised as most that he didn't. But what I was saying is that my reason for being pleased to see Saddam out of office had nothing to do with the weapons of mass destruction. It had to do with the potential threat that he could create to the rest of the world.
Yes, I realize that, but he was not simply deposed. The U.S. invaded Iraq, occupied it, and took control over its resources. And under international law, that it is illegal to wage wars to gain access to other countries, sovereign countries' natural resources.
Yes, no, I'm fully aware of the fact that that is a highly, it's a terribly important issue. And as I said in other commentaries, I've always thought the issue of what essentially amounts to what is often called preventive action on the part of some countries to secure resources or something else like that is an issue that goes back to the Cold War, when we had the very difficult moral dilemma of what do you do when you think a missile is coming in our direction, you're not sure whether it's an accident or not an accident. And that is a problem which I think is a deep moral problem in civilized society. And the issue is one which I don't think we're going to resolve very easily. And as you point out, yes, I am a believer in the rule of law, and I think it is a critical issue not only for domestic economies, but for the world economy as a whole.
Naomi Klein.
You've also advocated economic shock therapy and supported IMF programs that have transformed economies very, very quickly. And then you say that you are in support of the rule of law. But I'm just wondering how in a country like Russia there could be rule of law when it's being transformed and fast forward in that way.
Well, remember that you don't get a market economy merely by eliminating central planning. And remember, when the Berlin Wall came down and the Soviet Union disintegrated, you didn't have a market economy. What you basically had was a black market economy. And they tried to develop the institutions of the democratic society, and it's not something which they have had back for generations. And as you can see now, there's an increasing authoritarianism. It's a very, it's a society which has very different trends at different levels of that society, and